The royal palace of the Lithari Empire shimmered like liquid silver under the soft glow of two distant suns. Captain Ryan Hale had seen many alien structures before, but nothing compared to this place. Its tall arches curved like waves frozen in time, and the air itself seemed to hum with quiet energy. As he walked through the grand hall, hundreds of alien eyes followed him, their expressions mixed with curiosity, doubt, and pride. He was the first human ever allowed inside this sacred hall. The guards watched his every move, gripping their spears tightly. Even the servants who floated silently between pillars avoided looking directly at him. Ryan kept his posture calm, his steps steady. He knew every gesture mattered. Humanity had signed a fragile peace treaty with the Lithari Empire only months ago, and one wrong move could ruin everything. The Queen waited for him at the far end of the hall. Her throne was carved from something that looked like crystal, but pulsed faintly with light as though alive. Queen Sarathia was tall, graceful, and radiated an authority that made even her generals bow low. Her eyes glowed softly gold, her expression unreadable. Ryan had read a dozen reports about her: leader, warrior, diplomat, but none of them mentioned the quiet strength in her presence. When he finally reached the throne, he bowed slightly, just as their customs demanded. "Your Majesty," he said respectfully, his voice calm. "You are far from your world, Captain," she replied. Her voice was smooth but carried a weight that pressed against him like gravity. "What makes a human cross light years just to stand before a queen of another race?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Peace, Your Majesty, and curiosity." A few officers murmured among themselves, their silver-blue skin catching the palace light. To them he sounded too casual, too bold. But Sarathia didn't react. Her golden eyes stayed fixed on him, as if searching for something beneath his human calm. Rumors had spread across the galaxy about the reckless humans who fought storms, rebuilt cities, and ventured into unknown space without hesitation. Sarathia wanted to understand them. Some called them fearless, others foolish. Yet she had seen footage of Ryan Hale leading a rescue on a burning asteroid, pulling out Lithari miners trapped under collapsing metal. That act alone had made her curious enough to invite him to her palace. As they spoke, their words danced carefully between trust and testing. Ryan spoke of Earth, of its oceans and storms, of how humans learn to survive by standing together. The Queen listened silently, her expression thoughtful. She was about to ask another question when a soft sound interrupted, the faint echo of footsteps behind a pillar. Ryan glanced over. A small figure peeked from the shadows. The little girl had violet skin like her mother, and silver eyes full of curiosity. She looked no older than 6. When their eyes met, she gasped softly and ducked back behind the pillar. Ryan smiled gently. "I think someone's curious about your guest," he said softly. The Queen turned her head slightly. "Lyra," she called, her voice warm but firm. "You may come out." The princess stepped forward hesitantly, her small hands gripping the edge of her robe. Her voice was soft. "Mother, he looks so different." The court guard stiffened at her words, worried the human might take offense. But Ryan only laughed softly and knelt to her height. "Different isn't bad," he said kindly. "It just means there's more to learn." Lyra smiled shyly. "Do you have stars on your world?" "Millions," Ryan said. "Some so close you can almost feel them in your chest." A quiet murmur spread through the hall. No one had ever seen the Queen's daughter speak so freely to a foreigner. But before Sarathia could respond, the palace doors burst open. The sound echoed like thunder. A squad of royal officers rushed in, their armor gleaming. One of them shouted, "Intruder alert! The outer defense grid has been breached." The hall turned to chaos. Guards moved swiftly, servants scattered, and Lyra froze where she stood. The Queen rose, her presence commanding. "Secure the inner gates," she ordered. But before the guards could form a wall, a sharp blast shook the chamber. The great crystal windows flickered, and the child screamed in fear. Without thinking, Ryan ran forward. Lyra darted toward her mother, but halfway there, panic took over and she turned, hiding behind the only one who seemed calm, the human. She pressed herself against the back of his legs, trembling. Every sound in the room died instantly. The human captain stood tall, the Queen's child gripping his uniform. The guards froze in place, their weapons half raised but uncertain. No one moved. Ryan didn't know their customs well, but he understood instinct. He stood firm, his gaze sweeping across the room. She's just scared, he said evenly. No one's going to hurt her. Captain, one of the officers growled, his tone sharp. Step away from the air. Ryan met his gaze, steady and unflinching. She came to me. I won't push her away. A heavy silence followed. The Queen's golden eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger but with deep thought. Her daughter's small hands clutched the human's coat tighter, her breathing quick and frightened. For a brief moment, Sarathia saw something she hadn't expected. Her daughter seeking safety not behind soldiers, not behind her throne, but behind a human from another world. The Queen slowly raised her hand, signaling her guards to stand down. No one touches them, she said quietly. The soldiers immediately obeyed. Ryan looked over his shoulder. Lyra peeked up at him, her silver eyes wet but calmer now. He gave her a reassuring nod. It's okay, he said softly. You're safe, she whispered. They were shouting. I didn't know where to go, he smiled gently. You made the right choice. Sarathia stepped closer, her long gown whispering against the floor. Captain Hale, she said, her voice calm but layered with something new. Do you realize what you have done? Ryan stood straight, his expression respectful. Protected a frightened child, Your Majesty. Her golden eyes held his for a long moment. The hall remained silent, every alien waiting for her reaction. Then with slow, deliberate grace, she said, You stepped before the heir of my line. In Lethari law, that is an act of deep consequence. Ryan frowned slightly but stayed quiet. He didn't know whether to apologize or stand his ground. The Queen's face softened just slightly. Most beings would not have dared, she continued. Not even my generals. The tension in the hall began to ease, though the air still felt charged. Ryan could feel every eye on him. He looked down at the child, who was now peeking out from behind him toward her mother. It's all right, Lyra, he said quietly. You should go to her. But she shook her head and whispered, Not yet. The Queen took a slow breath, her expression unreadable. Then let her stay where she feels safe, she said finally. No one spoke after that. The sound of the twin suns outside faded into silence. The human stood like a shield, the Queen's daughter hiding behind him, and the royal court, known for its pride and power, stood frozen, uncertain how to react. Ryan didn't notice it at first, but something had shifted in that hall. The guards lowered their weapons not because of orders, but because they saw something that transcended fear and politics. They saw a being from a distant planet protect one of their own without hesitation. For a long moment, the Queen simply looked at him. Her gaze softened, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Then she said quietly, Captain Hale, you have changed something today. Ryan didn't answer. He just nodded respectfully, unaware that his small act of instinct, shielding a scared child, would echo far beyond the palace walls. The Queen turned toward her throne, her thoughts hidden behind her calm expression. Everyone leave us, she commanded. The guards obeyed immediately. As the last door closed behind them, the hall grew silent again. Lyra still clung to him gently, her breathing slowing. Ryan glanced at her and smiled softly. He didn't know what would come next, but one thing was certain. He had just crossed an invisible line between fear and trust, between two worlds that had never truly understood each other. The hall remained silent after everyone left. Only 3 people stood there now. The alien queen, her young daughter, and the human who had stepped into danger without thinking twice. Ryan Hale could feel the tension still hanging in the air, thick as smoke. The golden light from the ceiling crystals reflected in the Queen's eyes, making her look both powerful and distant. He stayed where he was, calm and respectful. He had acted on instinct, not on politics, and he knew that in some alien cultures such behavior could mean disrespect. Yet he couldn't regret what he had done. The child had been scared. To him, that was reason enough to protect her. Queen Sarathia finally spoke after a long pause. Captain Hale, she said, her voice quiet but sharp. No one in this palace has ever stood before the royal heir. Even my generals step aside in her presence. Ryan nodded slightly. I understand, Your Majesty. I meant no offense. The Queen's eyes studied him carefully as though trying to read his thoughts. Why did you move? She asked. What made you step forward instead of waiting for my guards? Ryan took a slow breath before answering. Because she was frightened, he said simply. Fear makes people or anyone freeze. You don't wait for orders when a child is crying. You just act. For a moment, Sarathia said nothing. Then slowly she sat down on her throne again. Her expression changed from anger to something more thoughtful. "On my world, hesitation is considered wisdom," she said softly. "You humans, you act first and think later." Ryan gave a small smile. "That's true sometimes. But sometimes thinking too long means you lose the moment to help." The Queen looked at her daughter, who still stood close to the human, her small hands gripping the edge of his coat. "Come here, Lyra," she said gently. Lyra shook her head. "I'm fine here," she whispered. That quiet refusal surprised everyone, even Ryan. But the Queen didn't scold her. Instead, a faint smile touched her lips. It was the first time Ryan had seen warmth in her face. "Very well," she said. "Then stay where your heart feels safe." Outside, faint sounds of soldiers could be heard as the guards secured the palace. Reports came through communication orbs. None of the intruders had breached the inner gates. The real threat had not come from outside, but from within. A faction inside the palace had tried to cause chaos, hoping to take the child hostage and challenge the Queen's rule. When Sarathia heard this, her jaw tightened. "They would have used my daughter as a weapon against me," she murmured bitterly. Then she looked at Ryan. "And you, a stranger, stood in their way." Ryan didn't know what to say. "Any father or mother would have done the same," he replied softly. But the Queen shook her head. "You are not one of us. You owe me nothing. And yet you risked your life for my child." She leaned forward slightly, her voice low. "There are those who say humans act without thought. But perhaps your kind feels before thinking, and that makes all the difference." Lyra looked up at her mother. "Can he stay here, Mama?" she asked suddenly. "Just for a little while?" The guards in the distance glanced at each other nervously, unsure if the Queen would allow such a thing. But Sarathia's eyes softened. "For a little while," she said at last. That night the palace was filled with whispers. The story spread quickly, how the human captain had shielded the royal heir, how even the Queen had lowered her hand to stop the guards. Servants talked about it in quiet corners. Soldiers repeated it in the barracks. Some called Ryan reckless. Others called him brave. But everyone agreed on one thing. No alien had ever seen courage like that before. In the following days, Ryan remained at the palace as an honored guest. The Queen ordered her advisors to show him their technology, their archives, their training grounds. Everywhere he went, people stared, not with distrust anymore, but with cautious respect. He spent his days answering questions about Earth, about human life, about what made his people fight storms, hunger, and space itself without surrender. Lyra followed him almost everywhere. She loved his stories about the oceans, the mountains, and the strange animals of Earth. She laughed when he described rain, imagining water falling from the sky. The palace guards often found her sitting beside him in the courtyard, listening with wide eyes as he talked about sunrise and snow. Queen Sarathia watched them from afar. There was something about this human that disturbed and fascinated her at the same time. She had led armies, signed treaties, and faced threats that would make entire worlds tremble. But she had never met anyone who stood so calmly between danger and a child, without asking who that child belonged to. One evening, as the sun set over the crystal towers, Sarathia summoned Ryan to her private hall. The room was quiet and dim, the air heavy with the scent of alien flowers. She stood by the window, her long robe catching the orange light. "Captain Hale," she said without turning, "do your people often act without reward?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Most of us don't think about reward. We just try to do what feels right." "Even if it costs you everything?" she asked. "Sometimes that's the only way peace means something," he replied. She turned then, studying him in the fading light. "My advisors fear that honoring you will make me look weak. They say I should treat your act as a simple accident." Ryan looked down, unsure what to say. "I didn't do it for recognition," he said quietly. "I only wanted her safe." The Queen stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "And yet, Captain, your small act has changed how my people see yours. They no longer call humans reckless. They call you brave." A faint smile touched her lips. "You've given them a story they will tell for generations." The next day she called a royal gathering. The great hall was filled again, officers, nobles, and diplomats from across the empire. Ryan stood near the base of the steps, uncertain why he had been summoned. The Queen sat upon her throne, her daughter beside her, calm and smiling. When the hall grew silent, Sarathia rose. Her voice echoed across the chamber. Before you all stands a human from a distant world. When danger entered this palace, even our finest soldiers hesitated. But he did not. He stood where no one else dared stand. Whispers spread through the room, but the queen raised her hand. He risked his life for my child, and through that act reminded us what true courage looks like. She paused, her golden eyes scanning her court. From this day forward, Captain Ryan Hale of Earth will be recognized as a friend of the Lethari Empire and a bridge between our peoples. The hall erupted in surprise. Even the generals bowed their heads slightly in respect. Ryan stood motionless, unsure how to react. Lyra beamed with pride, clapping her small hands together. The queen stepped down from her throne and approached him slowly. The entire hall held its breath. Then, in a gesture that no one had ever seen before, she inclined her head, a small bow but enough to make history. When my child hid behind this human, she said softly, the palace fell silent. Not out of fear, but out of awe. Ryan felt his chest tighten with emotion. He bowed deeply in return. Your Majesty, it was an honor to protect her. She smiled faintly. And in doing so, Captain, you have protected something far greater. The hope that two very different worlds can understand one another. That night, as the sun set again, Ryan stood on the palace balcony. The air was cool and calm. The lights of the alien city below shimmered like stars scattered across the ground. Beside him, Lyra leaned on the railing, pointing at the horizon. Do you think I'll ever see your world someday? She asked. Ryan smiled. Maybe one day when peace feels like the sky, too big for walls to stop. She laughed softly, her voice full of innocence. I'll tell everyone that humans aren't scary at all. He chuckled. That would help. Behind them, Queen Serathia watched quietly from the doorway, her eyes softer than before. She had ruled with strength her entire life, but now she understood something deeper. That true strength sometimes looked like a simple act of kindness. As the stars rose over the twin moons, the queen whispered to herself, the day my daughter hid behind a human was the day my people began to see beyond fear.